Glide. Lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Today, our study centers around an interview with Chairman Omali Yeshitela on his decision to form the African People's Socialist Party 50 years ago and taking the responsibility on his shoulders to solve the problems left unsolved by the U.S. government's attack on the Black Revolution of the 1960s. We think this discussion will be very critical to understanding why the FBI brutally assaulted Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party and the Solidarity Committee on July 29th of this year. It will help us understand our party's counteroffensive strategy for exposing and indicting the colonial capitalist government and push back these attacks through the support and solidarity of African people and others here and around the world. Before we begin this interview, I want to encourage everyone watching to like, comment, and share no matter what platform you're tuning in from. So before we bring up the chairman, we'll start with an overview. Born October 9th, 1941 in St. Petersburg, Florida, formerly known as Joe Waller, Chairman Omali was born and raised during a time where the struggle for revolution was the main trend in the world. He got his start in political life while trying to free himself from the U.S. military after learning about imperialism and connecting that to the struggles impacting African people, specifically in the U.S. Returning home from the military, Chairman Omali dove into the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s in search of a political home. After exploring organizations like the NAACP, the Nation of Islam, and the Congress of Racial Equality, Chairman Omali settled on joining the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, organizing the first membership-based chapter in Florida. In 1966, while a member of SNCC, Chairman Omali tore down a white nationalist mural from the walls of the St. Petersburg City Hall building during a demonstration demanding economic development for the African community. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Constantly targeted and surveilled by the colonial state, he was attacked, beaten, and thrown in jail as the U.S. counterinsurgency war against the Black Revolution heated up. Never retreating, in 1968, he founded the Junta of Militant Organizations, JOMO, and the Burning Spear newspaper, organizing throughout the U.S. South. On African Liberation Day in 1972, Chairman Omali, along with Lawrence Mann of the Black Rights Fighters and Keturah Carey of the Gainesville Black Study Group, came together to form the African People's Socialist Party, which turns 50 years old this year. Over the party's long, relentless history, the chairman has tirelessly worked to solve and popularize key questions left outstanding following the defeat of our revolution, including questions regarding reparations to African people, the role of white people in the African liberation movement, the primary contradiction facing African people, colonialism versus racism, building an international revolutionary anti-colonial movement, and much more. In 1976, he formed the African People's Solidarity Committee. He initiated the campaign to make reparations a household word with the launch of the first World Tribunal for Reparations to African People held in Brooklyn, New York in 1982. The chairman has traveled throughout the world to build international support for the African liberation movement, from Nicaragua to London, from France, Ireland, and occupied Azania or South Africa. Chairman Omali set out to complete the work of Marcus Garvey and the UNIA, by building the African Socialist International, extending the APSP to every place on earth where Africans can join and organize their respective fronts of the African Revolution. He trained and instructed our movement on how to build mass organization, launching campaigns such as the one to free Pitts and Lee, and building organizations such as the African National Reparations Organization, the African National Prisons Organization, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and the African National Women's Organization. Under the chairman's leadership, our movement was introduced to the concept of dual and contending power. And with this analysis, our economic work transformed, resulting in over 50 economic institutions today. He has provided our struggle with the theory of African internationalism, a blueprint for destroying the social system of colonial capitalism and ushering in world socialism. Throughout his life, Chairman Omali has faced countless assassination attempts, including the firebombing of his home. He has published numerous works, among the first projects being a pamphlet printed in 1975 titled Colonialism, the Major Problem Confronting Africans in the U.S. Some of his other works include Stolen Black Labor, Reparations Now, The Road to Socialism is Painted Black, The Tactical and Strategic Objectives for Black Liberation, An Uneasy Equilibrium, The African Revolution versus Parasitic Capitalism, and Vanguard, The Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution. Chairman Omali has dedicated most of his life to fighting for the total freedom and liberation of Africa and African people. This introduction hopefully contributes to our understanding as to why the chairman would be a central target of the July 29th FBI raids. The FBI made it publicly known that the African People's Socialist Party and broader Uhuru movement are targets for U.S. counterinsurgency by conducting violent, simultaneous pre-dawn raids at the homes and offices of movement leaders, including Chairman Omali Yeshitela himself in St. Louis, Missouri, and St. Petersburg, Florida. In an indictment of a Russian living in Russia, issued by the U.S. government as an explanation for the raids that used armored vehicles, assault rifles, flashbang grenades, and other tactics, identified the APSP and 4 movement members as unindicted co-conspirators. So that's the context for today's interview that we'll be having with the chairman. And so I want to welcome the leader of the African Revolution into this study and get right into our first question. So Uhuru, Chairman, I just want to thank you for, joining us and being willing to do this interview. I'm very honored to be able to conduct it. And if it's all right with you, I'll go ahead and jump into the first question.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Commander Kile. Before that, I just want to say that I think that one of the things that would have been helpful, even in terms of the introduction, I don't think we recognize the significance in the introduction of the founding of the African Socialist International, did we?
I mentioned that as I didn't say a specific date, but I did mention the African Socialist International.
Yeah, you did. You're right. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Okay. Uhuru. So this first question, Chairman, we are clearly in a new period in the world, and the FBI raids on the party are one indication of that. In many ways, this is the period the party has always worked toward. You have talked a lot about the significance of this particular moment in history and what it means for the African Revolution and oppressed and colonized peoples of the world. So can you discuss this?
Uhuru, thank you very much. I want to also just remind everybody who is involved in this study on today of the significance of this date, December 4th, 1969, is when the FBI, working with the Chicago Police Department and the DA, at 4 o'clock in the morning, a pre-dawn raid attacked the home of the Black Panther Party there in Chicago and murdered Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. And I just think it's really important to acknowledge that and for everybody to recognize one of the significance of the continuing existence of the African People's Socialist Party is that we represent a kind of continuum in the struggle of our people. And I think it's important because some place and various places around the countries, and perhaps in other places around the world, certainly some places where the African People's Socialist Party exists, we're prone to see different organizations or different groups, people talking about the significance of Fred Hampton. But in so doing, most do not recognize that this represents a turning point in the struggle. As African leaders they were being assassinated, murdered throughout the world during the same time frame. This is the time frame of the murder of Lumumba, overthrow of Nkrumah, murder of King, Malcolm X, et cetera. And we're talking about this whole notion of July 29th and what happened to us, the FBI, et cetera. The fact is that the colonial state has been working against us in a very serious way, and the 1960s was a high tide of this resistance, and therefore a high tide of what the United States government felt it necessary to do. So Fred fell during that time, and he was a part of development during that time. And our coming into existence, this 2 years following the assassination of Fred Hampton, that the United States government had predicted would be the death knell of the Black Panther Party. And they assumed, that is to say, the murder of Fred Hampton, they decided that the Black Panther Party, a public statement by the Attorney General, John Mitchell, I think his name was at the time, was that the Black Panther Party would be destroyed by the end of 1969. And from their perspective, I think it meant the Black Revolution, because the Panther Party, for whatever contradictions it may have had, and it did represent a revolutionary center, not only for Africans, but for many people around the world. So Fred Hampton was killed on December 4th. 1969. But it's really interesting to note that Hampton was killed. And what we talk about all the time, Hampton had already said, you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. And the fact that we're here today is actually confirming that statement and holding up Fred Hampton and recognizing what he meant in terms of the development of our struggle, that the United States government was determined to push back through murder and assassination of that anti-colonial sector. We used to call it the pro-independence revolutionary sector. And so Fred, died in that context. I just wanted to say that. And I think it wouldn't hurt for people to really give some thought to Fred Hampton today. Courageous, revolutionary brother, notwithstanding what the Judas Factor, I think it was called, or something like that, a movie that they made was supposed to demonstrate. He was an extraordinary force. Uhuru. Yeah. So.
Uhuru, Chairman, I just thank you for that intervention, because, this is the data is significant, and the discussion that we're having today is talking about solving the problems of the revolution. And when we look at the whole question of the 60s and the motion that was generated through that struggle, and the fact that we were on the cusp of, really digging into and solving these problems, and the US government came in and squashed those efforts. And like you said, Fred Hampton's assassination was one example of that, those efforts to crush it. And if we could just touch back to the whole question of this period and its relationship to the counterinsurgency of the 1960s, and how you've mentioned in the past how that was a dress rehearsal for what it is that we're confronted with today.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly significant period. It's a significant period in history, and the whole world is in a state of obvious kind of transformation. The political and economic configuration of the planet Earth has changed. The high tide of imperial domination, something that has been in a state of deterioration visible to people who knew what we were looking at. The high tide of that deterioration is something that's marked. I mean, even if you look at we've joked about this in the past, the popular culture in this country, resurrecting like a Superman and these heroic Captain America, all of these things that represent the past and of imperialist glory. It's a way of trying to attach themselves to that past, a dying social system. And then the other side of that, of course, in the popular culture, is that we see this fascination with zombies and vampires and things like that. So it's a system that cannot look forward without seeing death and despair, and cannot and has to therefore continuously look backwards at what it was considered this power, and it was a power of the imperialism. It was a really sharply determining factor in world history. And the whole social system that we experiencing now lived under, at various times, near absolute domination by colonial powers of the world. That has changed. And we've seen that change happening over a period of time, which is one of the reasons the party has been able to write for 20, 30 years about the crisis of imperialism. We say crisis, some people can't understand because they think of it in terms of labor strikes or something like that, the crisis of, but in historical terms, to knowing what brought this system into being and to see the unceasing struggle of the colonized peoples around the world to free themselves from this parasitic relationship, we could see how this crisis was building up. We knew how much the world economy depended on the extraction of this value from colonized peoples around the world. So we were able to talk about crisis, and this crisis, we've seen it erupt in different kinds of struggles in different places in the world at different times. But now what we're looking at is a situation where crisis is absolute. And we've seen a significant thing about it is not just we can talk about the existence of crisis, but we can talk about the hegemon for a social system, a colonial mode of production, colonial social system that has dominated the world for such a long period of time. That hegemon is in serious struggle. This hegemon has dominated the world at least since for at least 75 years, following England, and you're talking Portugal and Spain. All of these colonial powers dominated the world, and the only contest of significance to them was the one they had with each other and fighting for who was going to get the colonial booty. And so they've done stuff to try to rectify that relationship at different times, treaties and et cetera. And then, of course, now what we see is globally around the world, this escalating struggle of oppressed people and how it has tapped into the fractures, the structures and of the colonial system itself. And it has fractured and impacted even the spirit of the colonial people, the confidence that they've had before. We've witnessed the fact that the United States, for the longest period of time, which has promoted the notion that it was invulnerable, that nothing could attack it, nothing could hurt it, nothing could harm it. The old flag never touches the ground, boy. We saw Iran up the movement in Iran, 1979, overthrowing the Shah, the U.S. military embassy forces being held there for the longest period of time. And the U.S., even in this attempt to try to free them, ends up with a failed mission with sand getting in the helicopter workings, et cetera. And just this whole process of decay in terms of the power of the colonizer. We've seen it result in what we call Brexit, because these relationships, we have to remember, owe themselves to unity of some sort in extracting value, parasitic value from the colonies. And when this value, when there's shift in the economy to the point that one force seems that the others are dragging it down, or one force feels like it's not getting as much as it should get. Hence, you get a Hitler, or you get other forces in Europe, and they've done it in every instance to the fight among themselves, et cetera. So we see that this crisis, has resulted in fracturing, but it's been going on for a period of time now. At the same time, the incremental struggles, and I characterize it like that, because we mustn't make the mistake of thinking that something was just born today out of nothing, then pop out of the forehead of Zeus or something like that. But these struggles have been going on all the time. And as people who understand dialectics, we understand imperceptible movement. As long as movement is all the time. And sometimes even if it's imperceptible, this quantitative change and transformation, change leads to transformation, like a qualitative change. And that's what we've seen, like occurring. And this crisis, breaking free, exploding at different times, and the peoples around the world, even with all kinds of different kinds of governments and belief systems, et cetera, have been challenging this relationship. And so what we have now is this major crisis, this deep, profound crisis, and then we have this greater contention within the existing colonial mode of production, where the hegemon is challenged by Russia, China, all of these forces. It's just a real critical and historically significant moment of time. And it means like all of the structures that have bound this thing together, they are freeing. And that should be critical. That is critical for Africa and for African people. As long as we know what it is that we have to fight against and what we have to fight for. And that's one thing that gives the African People's Socialist Party, the significance that we have, because we've been working continuously for 50 years to solve these contradictions that's been confronted by our people, and hence our revolution for the longest period of time. And so we're here today with organization of different quantifiable forms of existence of organization in various places around the world. And so it's a perfect time, but we have to be able to take advantage. That requires organization. That requires the kind of a history that the African People's Socialist Party brings into this process. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you. So thank you so much, Chairman. And I want to get to what some of those problems left outstanding with the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s, what those problems were. And so, you've written about it, you stated it, that you felt the responsibility to solve all the problems left unsolved by the U.S. government's assault on the African Revolution of the 1960s. And this responsibility in so many ways has guided everything you have fought for and built over the last 50 years. So can you talk about some of those problems and what their significance is?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I was looking at something today from our Sixth Congress, and it's been printed as a book, Unequal Equilibrium. I think that and by the way, which defines more or less, which is a summation of what I've just talked about now, how the world is changing, the equilibrium, the balance is off now, and history is the direction we are, that is to say, the colonized people of the world are now engaged in what we like to refer to as a final offensive in terms of against this whole social system. But I was looking at the history of the party, which you can find as a chapter in An Uneasy Equilibrium, which is the political report to the Sixth Congress. And I just think that we've said you mentioned some of this in your overview of the problems that we've taken on. And this is not, when we talk about problems, we're not just talking about this as some kind of abstract issue, because what happened was when the revolution was defeated physically, that was only one aspect of it. Malcolm X wasn't murdered by the United States government because, he was a tall, light-skinned African man or something like that. And neither was Lumumba murdered and Nkrumah murdered and Guevara. The fact is that they in addition to what we meant in a practical, physical sense, it were ideas. There were ideas of resistance. King even ideas of resistance. That is not being satisfied with the status quo. You know, the FBI had figured out a replacement for King. His name was Pierce. He ended up being in the Reagan administration by an African guy. He ended up playing some role in the Reagan administration, but he had been chosen as a replacement for King should they ever get rid of King. So you saw, you know, like it was also murdering people like Amilcar Cabral, people who represented ideas of freedom, liberation, Frantz Fanon. And this was also necessary for the US government, for the whole imperialist social system, because Garvey didn't just represent a problem for the United States, he represented a problem for the whole colonial world. All the colonized forces in the world were against Garvey. So the ideas also were like critical. And with the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s, we talk about Nkrumah being overthrown, Lumumba being murdered, King, Malcolm being killed, Fred Hampton being, you know, like another example of forces that's being killed. And we saw this happening all over the world. And the thing about the 1960s too, that was most people do not understand, is the depth of the anti-colonial struggle, how it was maturing and developing and growing and changing the world in so many ways, that the United States facilitated the murder of something like a million people in Indonesia, the Indonesian Communist Party. This was 1966. 1966 is the same year of the Tricontinental Conference that happened in Cuba. And this follows stuff like the Bandung Conference in the 1950s. So there was this whole process of struggling. And the critical thing about all these, for example, Bandung, the white man couldn't come, was disinvited. None of the colonizers could attend Bandung, which didn't mean that all of those who were there were revolutionaries. I know a leading role was played by the recently liberated China. Zhou Enlai was there, and it seemed like China played a really important role for that. So you see this in the 1950s, Bandung, 1960s, we're still moving. And at the same time, we're seeing that in Bandung, Indonesia, all these dark-skinned people getting together to get rid of colonialism. We see another kind of development, civil rights movements emerging in the United States, similar kinds of struggles of where African people oppressed, Mau Mau rising in the 1950s. So whole fundamental thing, and the Mau Mau, what they say, they said uhuru. Uhuru, they didn't say we shall overcome. They didn't try to find a way to unite with the colonizer. Their objective was to evict the colonizer, evict colonialism. So these are some of the ideas that we were dealing with in 1966 at the Tricontinental Conference. This massive, amazing group of forces from throughout Africa, Asia, and what they call Latin America were plotting how to build a revolutionary organization where the struggle against colonialism could be collectivized. So this is where we were. And when you look at the assassinations that in this area, in this era, you see that's who was being targeted. That's who was being killed. The ones who were leading this kind of movement. And what it put us into was a place where, as Nkrumah had predicted, if the OAU didn't come out with the United Africa, neo-colonialism is something that they would impose on the whole world. Neo-colonialism on all of Africa with the Organization of African Unity, neo-colonialism in the different entities that they created, for example, the Organization of American States, led with the office in Washington, D.C., led, effectively by the United States government and what have you. Various other things like this occurred. And so what happened was, with the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s, with the assassination of our leaders, the jailings and murders and things like that, and the incessant kind of slander, we were pushed back into a place where now the objectives have changed. There's no longer fighting against colonialism. It's no longer freedom. There's no longer independence, but it's integrating with the colonizer. Now, clearly, this is not something that would have been born of the Black movement. So you're not fighting any longer to free ourselves from this system. We're fighting now to deepen our relationship to the system. By any other words, that's what it is, and that's what the anti-racism movement was all about. And that's why, as opposed to colonialism that has specific kind of features that you can define, which dealt with can lead to our liberation, you're now talking about this racism thing, which is actually the ideological foundation, ideological basis for the whole system of colonial capitalism. So that's what we were dealing with. And so we come into these meetings, even with the Black Panther Party. Remember 1969, the influence of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, building for 1976, building for a response to the what do they call it, bicentennial hoopla that had developed in the United States, where fervent patriotism was promoted. Red, white, and blue was everywhere, and curbstones, fire hydrants. I mean, you couldn't get away from red, white, and blue. And the Puerto Rican Socialist Party became a driving force to create in the United States a demonstration in 1976, in July of 1976, where the hysteria around the bicentennial, the 200-year founding of this entity, they organized, and we played a role in building for this bicentennial without colonies. Now, obviously, that's an impossibility. You can't have a bicentennial without colonies, because the United States is a form, it was born as a colonial power. But it helped us to get back to talk about colonialism, because nobody was talking about colonialism. So jump in, to that. Just as we were on every front, promoting, projecting the struggle against colonialism, fighting the ideological war that had to be fought, against the assimilationists and what have you. And so that's the thing that took us into Philadelphia as a part of that struggle. And on every instance we would do things to promote the whole colonial question as it was applicable to Africans here, because even the Puerto Rican forces from the Puerto Rican Socialist Party were able, everybody around the world, for the most part, has considered the struggle of African people up until the real sharp definitions we have provided over the last 20, 30 years. Everybody saw that the responsibility of an African revolutionary was to unite the working class, the American working class, or something to that effect, and that our struggle was to become a part of that. Even Black nationalists, so-called communists, that was what they see. There's a form of leftist patriotism, where somehow you're gonna make a revolution like the white people made a revolution, as they call it, from Spain and from England. They made their revolution, took over this whole thing. Now we're gonna make our revolution and take over 5 states or the Black Belt South or something like that, which is the land of the indigenous people, that causing suffering for the indigenous people, even as we have this kind of discussion. So we wanted to intervene in this struggle. We wanted to raise up the question of colonialism and make it a driving issue. We recognize, as the African People's Socialist Party, the representative of the African working class, it becomes our political responsibility to define what the hell that means. But the main thing is to put everybody in motion to knock down the door of colonialism. Now, because there can be no freedom for the working class, African working class, without the defeat of colonialism. Colonialism has to go. So if we can win the whole African nation toward the struggle against colonialism, one, recognizing the significance and the leading role that the working class must play, and the fact that the African People's Socialist Party is that advanced detachment of the working class. So we want to fight against colonialism, get everybody to fight against colonialism, and we see that as a part of the process of the working class taking power. Uhuru. And so anyway, those are some of the issues that we were dealing with. This whole question of racism that we were left, leaderlessness. We had a situation where, the thing is that all these people who claim to love the Black Panther Party and wear their Black Panther Party buttons, and all these retired Panthers, I forgot what they call themselves now, professionally retired Panthers. How can the hell can you be a professionally retired revolutionary? But anyway, all of these forces who claim I used to be in the Panthers, I love the Panthers, et cetera, they act like they don't know. In most instances, they're full of nothing, because the Panthers, the thing that made the Panthers significant is the fact that they perceived taking power as an objective that the party was supposed to play. Even the people who are retired Panthers, even militant Panthers, even many who've gone to prison, et cetera, and who we love, et cetera, forget or perhaps didn't understand the significance of the Black Panther Party was the fact that it was an organization that saw itself as taking power over our lives, certainly, but taking power. So dealing with this whole question of colonialism, organization, having organization. So you saw with the defeat of the Black Revolution, the question of organization was also swept under the rug, or if not swept in the rug, it was determined that the fact that the Panthers got killed, the revolutionaries got killed, shows us that what we need is not a party, but a coalition. So that's the thing is, let's build coalitions everywhere. That's one expression. The other one is, let's create a new multinational working class. All of these are efforts to hide by revolutionaries in the coalition, or hide in the white, so-called workers thing, et cetera. And so the fact is that the coalitions, we didn't lose the struggle because we didn't have coalitions. That is not why we didn't lose the struggle. That is not why we suffered military defeat. The fact is that there were loosely defined coalitions that existed at the moment, but that was not the thing that was going to take us forward. The question was the question of power. How do we get power? What do we need to have power, et cetera? And that's what that's the thing that we took into it. The other outstanding question, another outstanding question, I should say, is the issue of ideology, of philosophy, what you believe in, and the fact that it is primary, it is a critical kind of question that has to be taken on. And we did and fought around these questions forever. I mean, there are people who hate our guts because we raise ideological criticism. We ain't talk about nobody's mama. We ain't talk about who was sleeping with whom. We raise ideological, theoretical questions and question of tactics and strategy that our whole movement had to come to terms with if we we're going to be free. If liberation was an objective that we had to find, that we had to achieve. I mean, those are just some of the things that we did. And one thing that we talked about theory, we don't mean like this kind of utopian assumption that, or idealistic cultural kind of thing that they call theory, that, that one day because we're Black, we'll be free, and what we're looking for is to become Blacker than the next person, whatever the hell that meant. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, and some people were there. Some people were off into some Marxist thing out in the world, out in outer space someplace. But we said that a theory, that it has to be a product and guide for practice. If you have a theory that you cannot apply in the real world, it's useless. It's useless. And not only is it useless, but you are misleading the people, putting forth this kind of garbage nonsense, because we have problems to solve about how to be free. And that takes practice. There's a practical thing that's called freedom. And we need to know how it looks and et cetera, and be able to build movements designed to do that. So when we heard, the struggle for reparations, it stopped being just a theoretical question for us a long time. How do we practice? How do we get it? What do we do? The question of state power, we don't just hope, one day the workers will be free. And if they have the guts to talk about state power, and most don't have the courage to talk about the acquisition of state power. But it is, not something that will happen automatically. And how do we put it into practice? We say, okay, right now, colonialism dominates, the whole colonial world dominates. So what we engaged in doing is we want to create power even in the belly of this thing. And I say the belly, I'm talking about whether you were in Hauteng in South Africa, or over the hill in the Bahamas, or in Nassau, or some other place like that, to start this process, but a political process that wins masses of people to an anti-colonial stance in terms of negating the economic and political and cultural influence of a colonizer by, in part, adopting these economic and economic and political and cultural forms of resistance and tactics and strategy and what have you. So anyway, uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. I mean, I know that was just some, but it was, some of the most, I think, fundamental when we talk about the
white people question.
Yes.
Because that's something that's plagued our movement for a long time. And I came into political life in a very serious way as a Black nationalist, an unapologetically anti-white Black nationalist. If I just could not see anything, I mean, we've known of nothing but betrayal from the white movement, from all the way back to slavery and subsequent, and then all these phony communist organizations that exist today that are functioning nothing as apologists, as sophisticated apologists for colonialism, militant colonialism, if you will. So, that was an issue. And it was a real issue too for the whole movement. And, but let me just say that from its inception, the anti-white politic was not bad politic, it was good politic. The white man was the devil, as used to be said by Mr. Muhammad of the Nation of Islam. That was a potent kind of statement. That was a dramatic statement back in the day to say the white man is the devil. And of course, it was a statement that took advantage of the philosophical idealism that exists in our community that believe that some kind of God has to be present. So we give you a God and we'll give you the devil. And this is the devil. And this is satisfy all your religious inclinations. And of course, so, that was a really bold statement at the time. And of course, Africans who were under the leadership of a liberal sector of the African petty bourgeoisie, so our future has to be connected somehow to the white man, to the colonizer, in bed with the colonizer, in school with the colonizer, anywhere you could be with the colonizer. That was the line of the assimilationists. And so, going back, this whole struggle for a separate identity was a progressive kind of thing. And I came into political life quite aware of what white people was doing at the moment, had even helped to shape my personality in so many ways. It was as somebody who was anti-white. In fact, I believe that Africans who've had the kind of experience that most of us have had have to learn how to hate white people before we can love ourselves. And because we are nothing but poor imitations of the white man. And that, he has created us in this way. So the white people question has always been like a critical kind of issue to deal with, especially when it was assumed that if you saw the civil rights movement, it was white people who were leading it. Malcolm X, with his critique of the Black movement at the time, that's why would you, living in a time where our churches were being bombed, our leaders were being assassinated, white mobs were attacking our children. How in the hell is it logical to have a movement based on moving in with the white man? That's the most illogical stuff. I mean, here are the killers, move in with the killers, move in with the rapists. No. In fact, the white people actually take people who they call sex offenders and let the whole world know they're sex offenders and then put stuff up so that people can't get to them. But we had this movement, and which was ridiculous, and which is what the Black nationalist movement and the white man is the devil kind of thing spoke to. It took the white man off this high horse. It made it difficult for them to have these lily white band-aids and call them flesh colored. It made it, this whole notion that, all the stuff, about angel cake is white and devil's cake is black, and, all of this kind of nonsense and it was real in terms of ideological implications in our community. It was real. As Karl Marx once said, that philosophy, when it grabs the masses, becomes a material force, and it functioned like that. So this whole notion of who white people are, it became mysterious. It was mysterious in the first place because we didn't know human beings could act. We didn't know outside the relationship with white people that human beings could do this kind of horrible stuff to other human beings. I mean, the most grotesque. And, I don't care what movies you go to today that, supposed to be about the 60s or the 50s, bull. No, the real world in terms of how it affected African people, every aspect of our life, every bit of air we breathe, where you can't even walk down a damn sidewalk if a white person is coming your direction, not getting off the sidewalk, where I won't even go to some of the other lurid and horrible things that African people have been subjected to because of this relationship. You see this and hear about it every now and then when you hear about some notorious cop who has done this and that and forced this African woman to do this and that, or that is the reality that we experience in general. The thing that makes them phenomenon is because it's no longer the order of the day to do that kind of thing. So then it was a bold stance to take. It destroyed this whole myth of the supremacy of the white man. In my senior year in high school, one of the reasons I quit school was one of my professors, a really brilliant man, made the statement in class that Black people, that the Negroes had to, something about please white people before we could be free. We had to, satisfy whatever, white people required before we could ever be free. And, I tried to engage him in a feeble struggle, in that classroom, but that was some of the most ridiculous stuff that we lived with and had to contend with. So these ideas of the significance of Black people, and this is, of course, why I didn't know about Marcus Garvey, not, anything meaningfully, like most of the people who are in this meeting today probably don't, and certainly didn't for a long period of time, because this notion of the ideological component is really important. And then the question of what about the white people? What is it that makes white people do what they do? Are they really the devil? As one brilliant woman put it, are they genetic mutations or something to that effect? And what we have concluded as historical materialists is that the driving force in all human society is production and reproduction of life. No matter if you white, Chinese, Japanese, Africans, etc., the production and reproduction of life is a critical thing. And that the white man was born. I'm not talking about how they look. I'm talking about the white man. The concept of the white man was born in the process of getting what it needed to live, producing and reproducing life at the expense of Africans. Slavery and all this other stuff, and that helped to shape his attitude, his ideas, his understanding of the world, and that's not something that's going to be easily given up. It's also resulted in various other kinds of problems that exist within the white society that we need to be aware of. Therefore, we need to have a scientific approach to this question, and not just the question that they white, which at a particular time, might have been meaningful, was meaningful, but that's not the case today. So I think that the thing about the white man is one of the really important questions, the question of organization, the fact that we are the only party, African party, that has regular congresses where the whole membership can come together, can vote on the program direction of the party, can pass resolutions, can elect national leadership, et cetera, on a regular, consistent basis. That is something that I think has been critically significant for the African People's Socialist Party, development a real internationalism that has taken us to Ireland during the time the British were clear colonial powers in Northern Ireland, and to relationships with the Irish Republican Socialist Party, to take us to Nicaragua, where the revolution was really hot there in Central America, South America, et cetera, to meet with the Sandinistas, to have Sandinista representative at our first Congress in 1972 and 1981. To connect with revolutionary struggles all around the world, and to begin building the African Socialists International, hooking up with African forces globally to pull that together. That's part of the significant African People's Socialist Party. And it's, again, part of a historical continuum, and that's really important for us to know, especially members of the African People's Socialist Party. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much. And I just want to say that, what's clear is that through solving the problems of the revolution, we have the development of this theory of African internationalism, which you introduced to the world as, to help explain the world, for us to understand the fundamental contradiction and for where all the other contradictions stem. And so it's allowed us to even speak to all these other questions that you've mentioned, including the white people question, reparations, and things like that. But just that whole significance of ideas and the need for theory, it just clearly emerged through the process of you solving these problems. And then we can see it, coming back to us today, how this whole struggle, now we see colonialism being, discussed in these major arenas and things like that. And we see, Africans and other colonized people engaged in serious struggle with the colonizer around this question. So, we just have to, again, really just acknowledge your contribution to, what we see playing out in the world today, and including how all of the struggle that you've been engaged in has led us to this understanding around the question of the colonial mode of production, and how the whole world operates from that point, from the colonial mode of production. So just think that's really powerful. And speaking of, what distinguishes the African People's Socialist Party, we want to get into that question, because in the overview, we mentioned how you experienced several different organizations before coming to the conclusion of forming the African People's Socialist Party. So this question is, why did you feel compelled to form the African People's Socialist Party in 1972? And that you've stated that the party is the highest expression of the will to take power, something that clearly distinguishes the party from every other organization that is out there.
Yeah, let me say, I think it's important that I not understate the significance of theory. That is a fundamental question. And many people whom we've had to struggle with over the years in terms of the accomplishments of the party, to unite the whole African liberation movement in the struggle against colonialism, as opposed to continuing to dabble in this question of anti-racist politics. We made this struggle on so many different fronts, not only with forces like might be with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, NAACP, et cetera, but also Pan-Africanist organizations like the All African People's Revolutionary Party that used to have this position that African people were being attacked by what they call racism and imperialism, which is a form of philosophical dualism, because racism is the theoretical expression of what we might call imperialism. Imperialism, we're looking at real practical kind of contradictions, colonialism and things like that. But to say that the struggle is between racism against racism and imperialism is saying that the struggle is one against it's given equal weight to the ideas, to the philosophy of it's not even a philosophy, this whole racist construct that we give to the actual material force of colonial domination of African people. It's a form of philosophical dualism that equalizes the idealism and materialism. Idealism in the sense of of it being an ideological expression for a real world and giving primacy to the idealism. So that's part of what it is. And so many people were trapped here. And even from its beginning, this whole struggle against racism, people saying the problem is racism. I can't even remember when I first heard that term, but when I first heard the term racism, I was a relatively young person and I couldn't understand. I was really struck by it. I wasn't deeply political in terms of having any kind of political ideological training or anything like that, but I couldn't get it. I just couldn't get the struggles against racism, and I believe that's true of anybody who's ever thought about it, So theory is such a critical thing because depending, and when we talk about theory, philosophy, we're talking about our worldview. How do we perceive the world, our place and destiny in this world? How do we perceive it? And so this question of theory, philosophy is critical. And it is an expression, generally speaking, the philosophy that informs most of us is a philosophy that's born of the material base of the society, the economic base of the society. And it will push forces in a particular direction, philosophically, ideologically, and it promotes real serious kind of idealism, the assumption that that things have been preordained in some way or another, that some superior outside force is controlling everything in the world, and it opposes the notion of trying to understand the world by investigating the world. You want to know about the world, investigate the world. If you want to know about heaven, investigate that. But if you want to know about the world, investigate the world. And so that question of theory has a lot to do. And that was one of the big struggles I had with a pretty well-known Black leftists in the United States was this thing about Black Lives Matter. Because we've had a struggle with that from the very beginning. Because what problem you're trying to solve? Why do you don't just throw a slogan out there saying Black Lives Matter? The thing is that the slogan has to inform the masses of people, it has to give some kind of direction, has to suggest some kind of contradiction that has to be resolved. But saying Black Lives Matter doesn't do anything. And it's wide open, anybody can adopt it. And so it doesn't take us forward. And so at the time where, this whole scandal, if you will, emerges about monies in the Black Lives Matter movement, somebody's saying, okay, now we understand. No, you don't understand. If you think that's what the question is, that's never been the question. The question is how to have thousands of Black people marching through the streets saying Black Lives Matter. What does that inform us of? When somebody hears that a cop has killed somebody and they write a piece of Black Lives Matter thing and run out in the street, what is it saying that we are trying to do or accomplish? Nothing. So the question of theory is important. When Desi Woods was jailed in the 1970s, after killing this white man, Ronnie Horn, with his own gun for trying to rape her, we opposed what had been done with the case of Joanne Little, who just prior to that had been raped by a white man in North Carolina who was the sheriff and holding her in prison, and she had killed him and escaped from prison. And so what happened was everybody, and every feminist, everybody in the world could unite with defending Joanne Little because it was a struggle against violence against women, or the right for women to defend themselves. That ain't the question. Ain't gonna be no white women in that damn jail in North Carolina, and the white sheriff coming to do what they tried to do to Joanne Little. The fact is that's tradition. That's a colonial tradition. Raping of colonized women, raping of African women, and that's what you have to be willing to fight for and fight against. And so when Desi Woods was killed, was arrested for killing this white man, then we said free Desi Woods, oppose smash colonial violence, because this is what it was. And none of the left-wing organizations, white leftists, et cetera, could unite with that. Because they could unite with freeing Joanne Little because it's for them. They can unite, they can build their own organizations. If you want to free Joanne Little, then sign up and participate in this demonstration, and then you can come to my meeting on such and such a day. And I'm progressive because I say free, joy, and liberty. But you can't say oppose colonialism, free Desi wars, smash colonial violence. No, it's got to be self-serving. It's got to be something that feeds you and not us, except theory is critical. And that's the reason. That's why we oppose this nonsensical Black Lives Matter slogan. And some people didn't understand that, and they thought it was just a matter of being disagreeable. And that wasn't it at all. It was that we're trying to provide leadership for the movement of the people, and theory is a critical kind of question. It's not a small question. And many people, when we built the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. We did this too as part of the whole process of uniting the African liberation movement, which at this time was just expressed itself as different groups doing different kinds of things with any kind of line out there. And most of them were anti-racist. Certainly many of them were anti-racist, et cetera. So we said that the masses have to be won to an anti-colonial stance. And if we can bring as many African organizations as possible together to oppose colonialism, so the Black movement, Black people, not just the African People's Socialist Party, but Africans oppose colonialism. And call it what you want to call it. You know, you can call it a self-determination that we're fighting for, et cetera, but as many people as we can win to that, and then win to a general program that gives a weight to a strategic direction, an anti-colonial direction, winning those forces, and hopefully anybody who follows them to an anti-colonial politic. Now what we see is that the anti-racists in the coalition are also anti-colonialists, people who in the coalition are leading forces who initially wrote me saying that they can't talk about us being Africans because somehow that's going to be a problem, or they don't know if they should or not. Now they're the biggest Africans in the world. We've begun that process of changing and transforming stuff. Reparations. When we joined the reparations movement, it was a concept. I mean, some people with their briefcases were going here and going there, but the masses did not have access to reparations. To the African People's Socialist Party took it on because we recognize that the people are the real makers of history, and the consequences of the struggle of Black people has to be that the African working class has to come to power everywhere in the world, and we have to repossess the resources which have been stolen from us in Africa and elsewhere. So anyway, those are a few things. And you were, I forgot where you were. You had just read something with me.
Yeah, I'll repose the question, but just a couple of notes I was taking as you were saying, as you were laying that out. One, because you were talking about, the significance of theory, how we cannot understate this. And, when we don't have our own theory and our own worldview, our whole struggle remains centered around the colonizer and forwarding the aims and interests of the colonizer. And, the whole question of like race and racism, what, as you say, the ideological basis for the question colonialism, the fact that they were constructing this new world, this system, and they needed to have an explanation, a justification for what it was that they were doing and for the conditions that we were experiencing. And I remember just watching a documentary on the advent of this concept of race, which was like colonial science. It was like they were using a scientific process to come up with race or whatever, but it was colonial science. And that whole just concept, again, it came as a consequence of already.
But when did they say the concept of race emerged? And what you were just looking at? I
don't recall the date.
But I would tell you this, that it made its advent at the same time colonialism was happening in the world. And I just think it's really important to understand that what we now characterize and define as racism is the same thing at the same time that Europe was involved in what they call nation building. At that same historical moment, you saw the concept of race emerge as this sort of defining characteristics of societies, of some societies, Uhuru.
Chairman, thank you. And yeah, so I was also thinking about when you were talking about Joanne Little and Desi Woods, how today, even that whole issue around Roe v. Wade and things like that, it takes the struggles of African women, that those conditions that are imposed on us through colonialism, and uses those statistics and all these things to forward their ability to have access to abortion. So anyway, so just a couple of things that
they can have access to abortion, but we can't have access to the children that they steal from us every day in every community that we live in. And so the colonizer will put you in a very difficult kind of situation that's designed to criminalize and demoralize you, and will make you responsible for your own oppression and for all of the horrible things that's happening to you. It never is capable of doing a self-criticism. Yeah.
Real Chairman. So the question that I had asked was around distinguishing the African People's Socialist Party from other organizations, which I mean you've been doing throughout this discussion, but if you just want to specify what compelled you to form the African People's Socialist Party in 1972. You made the statement that the party is the highest expression of the will to take power. So if you could just talk about that.
Yeah, let me say that, raise that question again. I want to get about the significance of this distinguishing thing about the African People's Socialist Party.
Yes.
One of the things is, I think it's important to say, is that, well, we talk about the African People's Socialist Party being founded in 1972. But a party building process had already been begun by Jomo prior to then. I tried calling Comrade Inyundu before this meeting, because I was going to ask him, because he was one of the founding members of the African People's Socialist Party. He was with Lawrence Mann in Fort Myers in the Black Rights Fighters. And we had begun, Jomo had begun this process of different organizations, and they were mostly like young people's organizations that were anti-colonial in its expressions. Had initiated a process. We were meeting every month, the different groups from Belgrade, Florida, from Fort Myers, from various other communities in that Fort Myers area, from Tampa, St. Petersburg, Miami, Florida, various other, every month. And we would meet in one of the hosting cities' headquarters, and our objective was, from the perspective of the party, we had to unite this liberation movement. And we had to unite the anti-colonial forces, and how do we build organization? And the movement was under assault. The counterinsurgency was happening. SNCC was under attack in various other places. So we pulled together these forces, and we were going to build a statewide organization. It was some kind of nationalist organization. We've written about it someplace where you can find this. And in one of the meetings that we had, I think it was in West Palm Beach, Nyundu would probably remember, this force came to the meeting, who was one of and leaders of one of the organizations, and he brought this African newspaper, this African reporter with him, and to the meeting. And then the next day, after the meeting was over, in major newspapers around the country, this article talked about how this Black Liberation Army had met in this church, and that we were planning on how to kill Whitey, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I called this brother and said, "What's with this?" And it turns out that I said, "Did you see this?" And he says, "Yeah." He said, "I wrote it." This is the guy who brought the report. I said, "I wrote it." I said, "Why would you write something like that?" here these groups are meeting in the church planning to kill. Why would you write something like that? And because I felt like we needed more attention, this is what he said. Anyway, that was one of the things leading to the bust up of that process, because I refused to move forward unless I can get the rest of the group to at least criticize this guy for having done that. So we had really initiated this process. We were meeting on a regular basis. It was going relatively well, and we were consolidating unity of anti-colonial forces throughout the state of Florida. So it was something that we had worked on all along. And the other thing I would say is that when you look at some of the stuff that you've read, that you've alluded to, the colonial question, other kinds of issues, especially since the advent of the Burning Spear newspaper, we were using these to make political and ideological inroads and struggles, and helping the overall movement to come to some better scientifically based conclusions, and also to have the ability to connect what they said they believe in, their philosophy, to the real world, to begin to achieve some kind of scientific approach to the investigating of the social conditions that African people were confronted with, as opposed to empty sloganeering and that kind of thing. So this is something that we had begun. We create different kinds of organizations, tried to, and so we were struggling over these issues. So the party didn't just fall out of the blue. We organized the African National Prisons Organization. And this, by the way, is during the same time frame. I was having discussions with some forces about uniting at this time. This is later in the 60s, uniting the Republic of New Africa, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the African People's Socialist Party, and one other formation into a single organization. Let's build one political party. Let's do that. And when we, part of what we were doing to really promote that, to collectively, we were going to organize the African National Prison Organization. Had a magnificent meeting in Louisville, Kentucky, in 1979, with people from all over doing this. And I don't know, I mean, this was disrupted. And one of the persons, in the meeting, after the meeting, after they failed to disrupt the meeting, rushed back to New York, called their own meeting to build a prison organization, actually used the document that I had written for the thing he had just attended to build their own so-called organization, African National Reparations Organization. We pulled this together. This was to be an all movement. And when I say all movement, I'm talking about anti-colonial sectors of the movement coming together because everybody said they want reparations. Well, this is something we can unite around, even though we got different ideas and other ways, but we can build unity around this, build a mass movement to put reparations on the agenda. And the number of Black nationalists, one of whom is even considered by some the father of the reparations movement, modern, which is ridiculous. They fought tooth and nail against unifying this thing. So both the African National Prison Organization, if this movement was going to happen, it was led by the party. The same thing is true of the African National Reparations Organization. We saw these as means by which we can initiate mass struggle, win people to mass struggle, working together, and making our relationship based primarily on practice, where we can also deal with the theoretical questions in motion. But there was no cooperation with that. Any more than in some ways, there's little cooperation with the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa project after we get attacked in July 29th by the FBI, et cetera. People can unite with the notion of the movement or the progressives or dissent being crushed by the FBI, but they can't unite with the notion of uniting with the party. And in every instance, as quietly as it's kept, and it took us a while to understand this, it was a hostility to the leadership of the African working class, because that's who we represent, that's who we are, and that's who we've always been. And sometimes you have real radical and revolutionaries who are not from the working class, who actually shoot at people and have shot at people and been shot at and shot themselves. But the working class, your whole program is what we are talking about, not just about reparations, talking about revolutionary projection and the reparations and prison question. All of that falls within the context of fighting to destroy colonialism, liberating our Africa, uniting African people globally so that we can repossess our own resources, our own lives, our own future, et cetera. So we ended up having to do this. But the point I'm making is that this was a part, as I see it, as of a party building process that we've been engaged in for a while now. 1972, of course, the party was already created, but we were dealing with stuff before then and flushing out these ideas. And the Burning Spear was the instrument through which this was happening. So it wasn't just we were reporting on this, that we were actually engaged, in educating and struggling around ideas and things like that. So in 1972, as a part of the work that we have been doing, especially in Florida, but also we were doing work in Kentucky, and I think we were doing something in Indiana, a little bit in Indiana. So in 1972, we formed the African People's Socialist Party doing this work that we had initiated in the state of Florida, uniting the movement, et cetera. And in Gainesville, Florida, there was the Gainesville Black Studies Group led by Couture Carey. In Fort Myers, there was the Fort Myers Black Rights Organization, and there was the African People's Socialist Party. And we created the African People's Socialist Party off of this work. It was the ongoing process of work, and that we were engaged in. We were involved in. We were involved with the Fort Myers Black Rights Fighters longer than with the Gainesville Black Studies Group. But when we were doing work together, and the same thing was true. In fact, it was the activity of the African of Jomo that probably brought the Gainesville Studies Group into a more practical struggle and activity as well. So that's the process. It was a process. And so in 1972, I was a member of the founding African Liberation Day Coordinating Committee. I was a member of that. And so Florida was what I was organizing. And so in this process, we pulled together the forces that I just mentioned that became part of the method of building the African People's Socialist Party.
I heard, Chairman. I first want to say that what is clear when we say the whole theme of this year for our party's 50-year anniversary has been relentless. And so just even hearing you talk about this history and the things you were up against with the whole counterinsurgency happening at this time, and also the whole struggle to get to the point of forming an African People's Socialist Party with the task of completing the Black Revolution. I just think it's really important for us to internalize that this was not an easy process. As you stated, we've always had to swim upstream, and we've had to fight for everything it is that we even have today, and including working to consolidate the African People's Socialist Party. And I think everything that you described, it just supports the assertion of the party as the vanguard, the advanced detachment of the African Revolution. Everything that you just laid out just reasserts that. And I want to move to this next question before we close out this interview. And you've spoken extensively about the whole question and significance of colonialism and understanding colonialism and pushing this, driving it, so that our whole movement could really center itself around destroying colonialism. And a couple of things I want to raise before really clarifying this question. One, Malcolm X, spoke at Oxford in 1964, and you had stated that the basis for that invitation at the time was for the ruling class to get a sense of, where the motion was going, and how Africans in particular were understanding ourselves in the world, and et cetera, where the ideological development, where it was headed to. And of course, in February 1965, just a few months after he was assassinated. And in 2019, you were invited to speak at Oxford with recognition of the fact that you have propelled, the movement, the fight for socialism. You were acknowledged as that, the person who has done that. And so you spoke at Oxford in 2019. Today we see, again, this colonial question has been, is being fought and pushed towards the center. And even further development of this question is around the colonial mode of production. And so I just wanted you to talk about the colonial mode of production, the significance of understanding that today, and as it relates to this attack against our party, so overall.
Thank you. When people who study and are familiar with this concept of modes of production, introduced primarily by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, they are easily able to say that feudalism represented a mode of production, feudalism. It had certain kinds of characteristics that led to its designation as a mode of production. Of course, a mode of production is the way that the society is involved in reproducing itself and in creating life, et cetera, feeding, clothing, housing, and stemming from this mode of production ideas that stem from and then inform the mode of production, the society itself, the culture, the legal systems, all of this, these are representative of the superstructure of a particular mode of production. So if somebody understands feudalism, they can tell you that feudalism was that era when the masses of peasants and serfs were tied to the land, were unable to even move without permission from the landlords who owned the land, the nobility that owned the land. They can tell you about that. And they can presuppose some things about what they characterize as the mode of production they call capitalism. And again, this is how the whole system, when they say capitalism, they're not just talking about in New York, or they're not talking about in Florida, they're not just talking about the United States. But most of the time, when they talk about capitalism, they're talking about Europe and North America, and then those places like where white people, settlers have gone, like New Zealand and Australia and Canada and those kinds of places. So they can recognize this, and they said that the capitalist mode of production, it is the way that the society, not just in this place, but wherever it exists, it's the way that this society goes about creating life. It's how it has a material economic base, and the ideas, et cetera, stem from that and then influence that as well, a whole society. And that each, with the colonial mode of production, you see the philosophically tied to the church. The church was a profound, I'm sorry, not the colonial, but the feudal mode of production. The church was a profound influence, was able to even separate and give parts of the world, parts of Africa to Spain and one time into Portugal at another time, et cetera. So you had the divine rights of kings was a profoundly important philosophical thing that represented feudalism. And it gives me an opportunity to say that, gives me an opportunity to quote one of my favorite French anti-feudal philosophers. I don't know anything else about this guy. His name was Diderot. And I love the quote because it's representative of the struggle that was going on against feudalism at the time. And he says that man should never be free until the last king has been strangled with the entrails or the intestines of the last priest. And that was pretty deep. So that was an expression of anti-feudalism philosophically. But so also was the so-called Protestant Reformation was a part of the struggle against the feudalism, the stranglehold that the Catholic Church, had on everything. So people recognize that's a mode of production. It acted a certain way, and then people can say what capitalism is a mode of production, and they find this mode of production is characterized by the fact of the private ownership of the means of production, wage labor, a couple of other things. That's what characterizes it. But the problem is that when they show the transition from feudalism to capitalism, it's no easy road. In fact, to get there, Karl Marx comes up with the notion of a primitive accumulation of capital that was not a consequence of capitalist production, but a starting point. And he said this primitive accumulation of capital came through turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. And it related to the fact that the British fought a war, Opium War in 1841-42 against the Chinese and turned them. All of this is bringing resources, this primitive accumulation, this accumulation of capital that preceded capitalist production. So before there was capitalist production and accumulation, there was another accumulation of capital that was primitive, as he's characterizing it, the beginning. Primitive, the beginning of it. And the problem is that the beginning of it doesn't have a voice, you see. And so this capitalist mode of production comes into existence through the war that was made against Africa, primarily Africa, but then others as well, because the war in Africa resulted in the war on the indigenous peoples throughout the Americas and other places. At the same time, Europe was doing things in Asia, et cetera. So for the first time in history, there never was in history before now, before the advent of this thing that Marx characterized as the primitive accumulation of capital, and we recognize as another mode of production. This is not this was a mode of production that was necessary for the advent of capitalism itself. The thing that hooked the entire world up together into a single economy was colonialism. Wasn't a single economy before. Doesn't mean that people didn't trade before with each other, etc., but not as one particular economic system. And this is the basis for the existence of capitalism, you know, as we have come to know it. And it's extremely important to recognize that, because a mode of production also a part of that mode is the consciousness, it's thought, it's how the world is perceived. And the fact is that the colonial mode of production gave birth to the white man. Was no white man before then. Was before slavery, before what people refer to as slavery, and we characterize as colonial slavery at best, was no white man, was no Europe, none of this stuff existed before, was no America. Was no Australia and all of these different places where the white man has come, the colonizer has come as a part of the process of dominating the entire world. This is critical for people to understand, and as a consequence of that, as a consequence of the reality that it was this mode of production that gave birth to Karl Marx's brain, his perception, his ability to see the world just like everybody else's, because he couldn't see us except as accessories, auxiliary forces contributing to his own existence, which is not abnormal. Somebody said, well, Marx was a racist. I don't know if he's a racist. What I'm saying is that people born into social systems perceive the world from the basis of their relationship to that social system. And it was colonialism that gave birth to the white man, which is a nice thing to call. It's colonialism that gave birth to Europe. Was no Europe before. America was no America. Karl Marx doesn't say that when he talks about the primitive accumulation of capital and some of the things I've just mentioned, and when they talk about, they don't necessarily recognize the existence of the United States itself as a part of that. You hear anti-imperialists and people who call themselves opposed to settler colonialism and who are talking about how America hides its imperialism because you can't see what America's doing over here. America is an example of the colonial question. It is something that was born from this process. It perceives the world from that. It can't acknowledge that without disacknowledging, if there's such a word, itself. It because of implosion, you know, which is one of the reasons it's having these problems right now. Because of one thing that makes it possible for this to continue is the gun, is the ability to kill them at till. Of course, you said this 15-year-old boy whistled at a white woman. It's terror that's waged against the people. It's controlling the gun and the authority that make people who in Haiti who want to be free come up with horrible kinds of deals and agreements with you because you will kill them, because you'll overthrow them, because that's how this system works. It's a country led by assassins. That's what colonialism is all about, etc. So the struggle that we find ourselves involved in from time to time, that's really important. That's one of the reasons the theory that the party and the working class are so critical to this movement of taking this struggle, this understanding to masses of people. And the thing that we have to our advantage is that the colonial education system doesn't work for us. So there are masses of people who have not been indoctrinated in the same way the most educated of us get indoctrinated. We can come to understand the world, and those of us who have some facility in dealing with abstract questions and issues, etc., can become re-educated through this process, can learn to see the world from a different kind of perspective. So the party, plays a role in making that happen. And this whole question of African internationalism, how we perceive the world, is such a critical question. And when we talk about the colonial mode of production, we're saying moving beyond this, we push. Say you got to say colonialism, fight against colonialism, etc. We've done that. We pushed that. Now, what we're saying is that you have to recognize you have to go beyond that. That's really important to have come to, but you have to recognize that what we have at one juncture, colonialism might have been a policy by Portugal. Might have been, let's go over and take this and et cetera, et cetera. And at different times, it has been policy. The white people who stole Palestine, and much of the world was recognizing that the white world was recognizing you want to get rich, you want to build, go and steal somebody else's resources. That's what Leopold in Congo did. He wanted to make it big time. So, participated in this Berlin conference, et cetera. This is the way you quickly, enrich your societies and things like that. So that happens. The thing is that at some point, we're not just looking at a policy of a particular government. We're looking at now a whole world, a network, it's structures and everything have been consolidated that locks it into a single world economy. And for the longest period of time, this world economy has been dominated by Europe. In this instance, I mean, the United States as well. There was a contest, a moment with Japan, who was determined that the European colonizers shouldn't dominate Asia, that Japan should dominate Asia. And so it became a force of its own in a very serious kind of way. But the colonial mode of production is something that's really important for us to understand. Once we understand that, then we move to recognize that what's been talked about in terms of state power, right? There's a state. A state comes into existence so that the contest between the oppressed and the oppressor is maintained in a fashion that's favorable to the oppressor. The oppressor will maintain control. The structures that created, that's characterized as a state, the bureaucracy, the military, the prison system, all of that is a part of the state. And so that comes into existence. Most of our people and many people who are involved in the movement don't understand that. When they see a government, they don't recognize that in what we characterize as bourgeois democracies, the purpose of selecting governments, electing people, represent a nonviolent contest between different sectors of the bourgeoisie, of the ruling class, of the colonial bosses. Different sectors can now fight. They don't have to, like Berlin, they almost had to go to blows about who was going to get what part of Africa. Now they've manufactured the situation. We talk about on local levels, we talk about with institutions like the League of Nations, United Nations, they can create this democratic way of oppressing and maintaining control of the peoples of the world. And so the state is this entity, this bureaucracy. You're talking about, again, military prisons, talking about CIA, FBI, etc. All of them are instruments of state power, but the advent of colonialism now moves the issue of the state from beyond what we now call England beyond what is now called France, et cetera. It's a global situation of state power. And that's why we see these various expressions of authority from imperial powers existing over the lives of Africans and other peoples around the world. So you have this state power by a united, more or less united bourgeoisie. From time to time, it's not, because it fights over who's going to get what, et cetera. So that's something that's not generally understood and recognized. And generally understood and recognized is that what we, again, not talking about just policy in a particular place. We're talking about the existence of a whole social system that embraces the entire globe. So all the people on the planet Earth, most of the people on the planet Earth, certainly this has been true for a long period of time, it's being contested now, participate in creating life for themselves and for et cetera within this mode of production. This is how we do it. This all comes from the same economic basis, the whole world functions off the fuel that is stolen from Africa. That's why you have governments of assassins and murderers and committing all kinds of offenses against the people. That's why the legal system ought to be illegal. That's why even if it's legal, it's illegitimate as far as the majority of the people of the world are concerned. This is the state entity that has come into, not as an English state or solely as an English state. You have divisions of unity that revolves around what sectors of the international bourgeoisie is controlling of making its living off what sector of the thing, but they all connect together in terms of protecting the colonial mode of production. And so that's really important to understand. If you understand that, it helps us to understand a lot more about what's happening, like in the world with us. Why the police act a certain way. Why they treat Black people different from they treat white people. People tell us, well, the state is repressive, et cetera. Why they repress us with bombs and stuff like that? Why they repress us with assassinations? Why they repress us with 2 or 3 killings a day? It's not just the state, it's a colonial state. And this is what gave birth to this whole process. And many people don't recognize that. When you're looking at laws of social development, it has to take into consideration that a new global society has been created with the colonial mode of production. And it's a parasitic relationship that defines this global society. And when I say a relationship, it's important to understand that, because the colonizer could not exist without the colonized. It is a unity of opposites. One gives definition to the other. It's like up and down. You can't have one without the other. So that's what you have. You have a relationship. You don't just have Black people being oppressed. You have a relationship. There's a dialectic. There's the resources coming from the African community to keep others. And all of us exist and live within that context. So if I'm looking for a job, I'm looking for a job within that context as an African or whomever else. That's the mode of production that dominates the world. That's why in the 1960s, revolutionary movement was so important. It meant a different thing for China. China was an extraordinarily important force. It was aware of making a global revolution that would put the people in power, not just a local thing, not just finding a way to be more competitive within the existing mode of production. It presupposed that another mode of production could replace what they characterize as a capitalist mode of production that we characterize as a colonial mode of production, and that the Chinese proved was a colonial mode of production. We can get to that some other time if we want to, which is one of the things that distinguished Maoism from the other Marxists, et cetera. And so I know that there was other point that you were raising that I was supposed to be addressing here, but Uhuru.
No, Chairman, I think you addressed it very well. And again, as you said, we have to now understand this question of the colonial mode of production. We have to understand this. And this is something that, increasingly, especially with the work of the party, that we'll see influence, the overall questions being discussed now. The whole question of the colonial mode of production, will become the dominant thing that we're discussing. So,
Comrade Director.
Yes.
We are increasingly capable of quantifying the emergence of the colonial mode of production. You see, we can show, like, for example, we know that by 1500, Portugal had taken some 700 tons of gold out of Africa. That's Portugal alone. we can quantify how Portugal built the whole sugar production through colonial slavery. We can show how the agricultural industry was created from the enslavement of African people, African slave production, and also what was happening to the Americas, all of the land and other resources that came in and the fact that they killed so many indigenous people. I saw something perhaps even today talking about how in India, I think they said something like 100, 200 million people killed within a short period of time by the British. This is the foundation for the colonial mode of production. It's quantifiable. It's something that can be identified. This is what gave birth to it, and there's not a Marxist in the world that can show us in terms of how the development of society is simply based on some internal dynamics that happen inside Europe or North America. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. So this has been really profound. I want to thank you for taking this time to answer all of my questions. And we're going to just take a couple of minutes to address some questions that came in from last week's study. And we want to be able to deal with those. But first, I want to give you a little bit of a break and go ahead and just give a couple of announcements. Before we continue. So first, I just want to encourage people to join the counteroffensive to stop the FBI attacks on the African People's Socialist Party and the African liberation struggle. Donate or volunteer to the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Defense Campaign today. For more information, you can go to handsoffuhuru.org to volunteer, donate, or sign the petition and the emergency response pledge. And save the dates for these upcoming Hands Off Uhuru events. Monday, January 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Come to the mass meeting titled Meet the Unindicted 4 Co-Conspirators. And on Saturday, January 21st at 5 p.m. Eastern, the Hands Off Uhuru Defense Campaign hosts an event titled Build the Anti-Colonial Defense, Stop the Attacks on African, Puerto Rican, Indigenous, Mexican, Palestinian, and all liberation struggles. So again, mark your calendars for those two upcoming Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa campaign events. And make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, as well as all of the other events going on in the Uhuru movement. We broadcast right here on Burning Spear TV's YouTube channel, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating now at paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. And 2023 is just around the corner, comrades, brothers, and sisters. So Uhuru Tours and Speakers Bureau is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party that coordinates events and tours for Chairman Omali Yeshitela and other party speakers and leaders. So you want to go ahead now and book Chairman Omali and other Uhuru movement speakers for your campus or organizations, any events coming up. You want to make sure that you have the dynamic presence of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and other Uhuru movement speakers. So you can email info@uhurutours.com or call 727-914-3621 to get these comrades on your powerful program. And finally, just want to conclude by saying, one, to learn more about events going on in the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement overall, you can go to theburningspear.com/events. And just want to make a call, especially considering this incredible discussion that we've had with the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African revolution, that the responsibility is on us, comrades, to complete the Black Revolution of the 1960s. And we have the vehicle, the African People's Socialist Party, which is going that makes that possible for the African people and the world as a whole. And so I just want to, really encourage people to not just be spectators around this discussion, not to just be impressed by, what the chairman has just laid out in terms of, his own commitment to the struggle for majority of his life, and all of the critical questions that were solved and things like that, not to just be impressed by that, but to join that, to claim that history as your own, to stand on that foundation and complete this revolution. And in order to do that, you got to be a member of the African People's Socialist Party. So visit apspuhuru.org, fill out that contact form to make your commitment today to say, I want to join the African People's Socialist Party. I've seen this history, I've heard it, it is profound. This question around colonialism and destroying the colonial mode of production is absolutely necessary if I'm going to know peace and prosperity in my lifetime, in a world that doesn't, where we can live, where nobody has to live at the expense of anybody else, where we have our Africa, we have freed our African people, and that we can also ensure for generations to come that they don't have to live, you know, under these same conditions, under the same brutal social system. We want to eliminate that in our lifetime and certainly for the future. So again, African People's Socialist Party, join this revolution, apspuhuru.org. So Chairman, we're going to just take these last couple of minutes to address the questions that came in from last week, some of the ones that were left outstanding. And this first one, well, you've talked about the colonial mode of production quite extensively here. But Comrade Omali in Sierra Leone did ask, what is the difference between fascism and the colonial mode of production? So I don't know if you wanted to say any more about this question of fascism.
Well, I want to thank Comrade Omali for raising that, because it's an outstanding issue. And even after we've talked a lot about colonialism, I am surprised sometimes to hear some of the participants in the discussion go back to defining what is happening now with African people, especially in the United States and Europe, as some kind of emergent fascist, or I forgot the other term they use for a so-called authoritarian state, something to that effect. But when we talk about how colonialism is a mode of production, it should help us to understand that it is an extraordinarily vicious parasitic relationship that we're talking about, and that it is vicious all the time. There's never a time when colonialism is not vicious. Fascism is something that happens, it's a form of the state. We talked about the state. We talked about how the state represents a certain bureaucracy and the military and all these other forces that are connected to it. Well, fascism is simply a form of the state. What it looks like, democracy is a form of the state, what it looks like. You can vote under democracy and you can still have colonialism. You can have a fascist colonial state, or you can have a democratic colonial state. In any way you have it, you are colonized. What happens is that something happened to European, and happens every now and then when an economic or political crisis emerges, or a political crisis emerges from the economic crisis, which usually have its basis in the struggle of the colonized people. Then you see this struggle, deepening contradictions happening among the colonizers. And so the colonizers, the best of them, the liberal of them, have come up with this concept of fascism, when the state represents itself to some extent in the lives of the white people or the colonizer, and similar to how it represents itself for the colonized. It has been a historical contradiction for bourgeois democracy to, on the one hand, promote the whole notion of rule of law and democracy, all these things, which is the emergence of capitalism does this, by the way. On the one hand, it says this, and then on the other hand, there is no law for the colonized. Beheadings, regular murder, brutality, rape, pillage, just an ordinary part of the process. And reconciling those things has been a contradiction for the colonizers, generally speaking. And so what they have come up with is this whole notion that somehow, first of all, they reconcile it by saying that they have a responsibility as colonizers to bring the colonized up to their level of civilization. And in the process of doing that, they can use whatever means necessary. And once they become civilized, then, of course, they can enjoy all the democracy and freedom of white people. In fact, the League of Nations, when it was created and the whole issue of self-determination became a part of its agenda, they talked about self-determination for the civilized countries. So you had to prove civilization, that you've attained levels of European civilization in order to even have the right to self-determination under European defined international law. So that's part of what it is that we're looking at. The fact is that Europeans have these contradictions, every time the crisis gets deep enough, just like you see happening within the United States, white people attacking the Capitol and et cetera, then they somebody like Trump, masses of white people following them, going in some direction that upsets a whole group of white people. And these are things that's sparked by the contradictions in the economy, the whole global colonial economy. And so fascism becomes the discussion. And the whole left wing of the colonizers, from the, if you want to characterize it as this, even from the Democratic Party all the way to most of the so-called white communists saying that what we got to do is fight against fascism. Fascism is coming. And that somehow this is something peculiar that's happening now where you don't have no rights, when colonialism came about as a consequence of stripping Africans and colonized people of anything that looks like any rights. There's never been any rights. And I've been trying to figure out how the hell am I to distinguish my being colonized from your being victims of fascism? What is the me being fascist? I mean, attacked by fascism. And of course, it's impossible to do that because we have no rights as colonized people. But a sector of the colonial power would employ us, will bring us, will use us as a struggle against another set of colonizers, not to end colonialism, but to end the attack of what they perceive as their God-given rights, et cetera, as civilized people. Yeah. So, Morla, I hope that was helpful, because the struggle that we're involved in is against colonialism. And I heard a person was a kind of important ideologue from the Black left movement, because we challenged that whole notion of fascism. And so finally they come up and say, well, we were the first victims of fascism, Black people, like our history of fighting against, well, if our history was fighting against fascism, what are white people fighting against now? Colonialism? You understand what I'm saying? What is it? How do you talk about? No, fascism was something that was invented, created, and it's an ill-defined concept of that. And I know you can go to, to your Marxist dictionaries and stuff like that, and you will not find a decent definition of what fascism is. I know for sure that fascism does not approximate what has happened under colonialism. And the worst examples of fascism that you can come up with from Europe pales against Leopold's murder of 11, 15 million African people in Congo. And that's just in Congo alone. Of 100 million or more in India that was created by England. So anyway, the thing is that we have to fight for power. We get hung up in the fascist struggle, anti-fascist struggle, because we see a future existing within the colonial mode of production. We see a future there, and not a future as a free and independent people who are responsible for the destruction of the colonial mode of production and setting off on a new course of our own, solving our own problems, defining our own issues, etc. So if you're just fighting forever to get along, to be a Rodney King, then the struggle against fascism is for you. But if you want us to be free, and if we want in Longhi and Freetown, in Sierra Leone, Chairman Omali, for our people to be free, and then the struggle against fascism is not going to make it happen. What's going to make it happen is the struggle against colonial mode of production, the struggle to unite and liberate every inch of Africa and all the African people on the globe. Uhuru.
True, Chairman. Absolutely. We are not solving the problems for the colonizer to maintain their position as the colonizer on the backs of the rest of us. So I just want to appreciate this continued clarity around this question of fascism. And thank you to Comrade Omali, as you indicated, Chairman is based in Sierra Leone, is one of the party leaders in Sierra Leone. So, Comrade Omali, thank you. I think we might be able to take one more question. There's I didn't get who asked this question, but it was: salute to the party in the relentless struggle. Chairman, people say that the relations of feudal society are returning and call it techno-feudalism. What do you have to say about this? This probably is also related to the question you just answered, but.
Yeah, I just think that an error would be made if we see history unfolding in that fashion. if we say that the movement from feudalism in Europe to what they call capitalist mode of production, we recognize the colonial mode of production. If we recognize that this colonial mode of production, or the capitalism, came about as an existence of colonialism, and that Europe was a primary beneficiary in this relationship between the colonized and the colonizers, and that all of the economic activity, as Karl Marx said, that slavery in Europe required as a pedestal, he said wage slavery in Europe required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. And so, like, all of the economic activity that we see happening in Europe on this pedestal is just that. It's something that requires the colonial subjugation for our people in terms of and other peoples around the world. And I just think it's really important for us to understand that. And I think there was an aspect of that question about there's some kind of what is it? How do you characterize this feudalism?
Techno-feudalism.
Techno-feudalism, presupposing some things about the influence of entities like Amazon and Google and Facebook and all of these forces who reduced, in some extent, they are threats even to existing governments, which is why China moved on them, and how the United States has been moving sometimes surreptitiously, in this arena as well. But the fact is that the mode of production that we are talking about continues to be a colonial capitalist mode of production. There's nothing that changed the mode of production. To say that the majority of the forces engaged in economic activity do so under the influence and through the instruments of Google and the rest of them, is not to liquidate this whole question of colonial domination of Africa and African people around the world. And in fact, when you look at what they characterize as, I forgot the term they use for it, to show that all the computers are in the white places in the world, and most of the white world, and that technology is centered there, then, it shows clearly, like, I believe some of the contradictions in that position. Uhuru.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and thank you, comrades, for the questions that you posed last week, and also the ones from this week, which we will go through and save for the next Q&A portion for the Omali Taught Me Sunday Studies. So just want to let people know that if you ask a question today, we are taking it down. And like I said, we'll have an opportunity to address it in our next study. But Chairman, we are winding down time here. This has just been an amazing discussion. And I just, again, really appreciate you for just going through this history and how it relates to today, so that we can continue to get a better understanding of this attack that was made against our movement and our responsibility in this period. So want to just turn it back over to you for some closing remarks before I wrap up today.
I'll be brief. Everybody should recognize that the most recent issue of the Burning Spear is out. You ought to get this. It's an incredible issue, and it talks about celebrating 54 years in print. That's a remarkable achievement, and that's a statement also about the party. Comrade Diop raised this issue about a growing concern among what he calls sectors of our movement about the rise of so-called say the word, and the right wing. And but the point, of course, is that different times the system goes through crisis, and when it goes through crisis, it will do all kinds of things. But there's nothing more totalitarian than colonialism, and that's the fundamental question that we're dealing with. The United States and none of the colonial powers can tolerate democracy. We express democracy as the highest expression of democracy is what? Is self-determination. They attacked us because they can't deal with democracy. We have to fight them because it's an Achilles heel. It's a real contradiction that they're confronted with. Even as we build our own power, we have to engage them in this arena of democracy, democratic rights, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, assembly, all of these kinds of things, and the right to associate with whomever we want to associate. with. We say, this is what you say. This is your Constitution here, your Bill of Rights here, et cetera, et cetera. And this has to become part of the weaponry we use. And we use that in every forum that we can, from elections to our own mobilizations that we do, independent of the electoral process and what have you. They need to be choking on this whole notion of democracy that they promote so much that they cannot deliver, and they have to oppose in every opportunity they get, like attacking people in pre-dawn raids. In 1969, when they murdered Comrade Fred Hampton in Chicago, July 29th, here in St. Louis and in St. Petersburg, Florida. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Thank you so much again for just this incredible study, this interview. And I want to just thank all of you for participating, who are watching right now, who shared this conversation. Also want to shout out Comrade EL, who donated $20 to the study today. So thank you, Comrade EL. And as we wrap up, I just want to again thank this incredible discussion, all of our viewers, and the Omali Taught Me Show team for helping with this production. And want to remind people to like the chairman's Facebook page and all his social media platforms, as well as subscribe to the Burning Spirit TV YouTube channel to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. So Uhuru, relentless, vanguard
up.
Uhuru.